All right, I will call this meeting of the corporations, the corporations elections and political subdivisions committee to order. That was a mouthful for me. I'm used to just saying the committee on judiciary. So this is a new committee to me. So I'll have to first get the name right. With that, will you please call the roll, Barb?
Representative Chadwick.
Here.
Representative Haroldson.
Here.
Representative Harshman.
Here.
Vice Chairman Knapp.
Here.
Representative Newsom.
Here.
Representative Ottman.
Here.
Representative Wiley.
Here.
Wiley. Representative Yin.
Here.
Chairman Olson.
Here.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome all the visitors in the audience here today. Welcome Secretary Gray as well. Welcome to those online. And before we get started, I just want to touch on a few things, primarily because this is a new committee to the subject matter for everyone except for one returning member, Representative Yin. Thank you for sticking with being the senior member on the Corporations Committee. We appreciate that.
Mr. Chairman, I only served less than a year on the committee, but thank you.
Followed me over here from Judiciary. But we do also have newer members to the legislature, so this may be for you all newer members. This could very well be your first committee. So, just a couple of things, reminders to address the chair. That applies to our members as well as to the members of the public. Try to keep the dialogue through the chair. A couple of other things on process, just for my newer committee members, and if you're attending in the public for the first time, we will hear first from sponsors of bills. Now, the first couple of bills we have up are going to be our interim committee bills, so they'll be introduced either by myself, or I know that Chairman Zwanitzer is here, who served over the interim of these bills and can introduce the bills to us as well. Then we'll obviously pass through the experts or open testimony on the bills, which would include our agencies, and then general public comment. And after we close public comment, committee is your opportunity to decide whether you want to do something with the bill. In other words, move it. And that is also the opportunity that you have to discuss the bill. So try to use the first part of the meeting with public comment to get your questions answered. Use the second part of the meeting to make amendments to the bill or discuss the bill. And once public comment is closed, my strong preference is for it to remain closed. However, there are circumstances where you may have a question that you want to ask from. Usually it might occur with an agency, and we'll bring them back up to try to address your questions. But try to get those in before I close the public comment. And really that's the process that we're going to go through today. So with that, let's get started. We'll start with House Bill 5, voter registry lists voter ID and absentee ballots. What I understand briefly about this bill is that it amends in a definition to do two things. One, it creates a unique identifying number generated by the state under the registry list. That's on page 2, lines 6 through 7. And then number 2 thing that it does that I think we'll all be very familiar with is that it allows, as part of that registry list, information relating to absentee ballot requests and returns. So if you've ever served as a candidate, you know that maybe if you've served in a candidate more than one election, everyone here served as a candidate. You may be familiar with the ability to request absentee data, and that went away based on an interpretation inside of the previous administration under the Secretary of State's office. And this bill seeks to clarify that, that information is available as part of the general registry request made by a candidate. Okay, and that's what the bill does. Right, Chairman Zwanitzer? Do you have anything you want to add? Particularly maybe, the absentee one's pretty straightforward, but the unique voter ID number?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just some background to further elucidate what Chairman Olson said. So after the Help America Vote Act in 2002, many of you remember the Bush-Gore, I guess I can call it a fiasco in 2000. The federal Congress created HAVA, the Help America Vote Act, went down to all the states. Part of that implementation without going into too much detail, every voter was assigned a unique voter number for some tracking, some federal requirements through the system. Over time, and at least for the past 15 years that I've been running, when you request the data file from the Secretary of State or your county clerk on all of your voters, that number is just included. It's kind of part of the package. Over time, the crafty political campaign world has been able to use that number as your identifier. If you move locations, it follows with you. And they take that number about your information, and they can tie that to any number of other information about you in the universe. How much your house is worth, your car, what magazine subscriptions you have. When you get into the campaign world, it is actually legitimately scary how much information there is about you. They can tie to your voting history. If you voted in a primary, a general, which ballot you requested. Then they do these things like propensity scores. How likely are you to vote? You know, far ideological on the spectrum. That, as well as the information on whether you've requested an absentee ballot or not, and you've turned that back in, has generally been information that the county clerks have provided to candidates upon request over the years. They did discover 3 years ago there was no official statutory allowance to be able to provide that number. As you can imagine, after the 2018 campaign for president, things got a lot more serious, obviously in election law, and people started demanding more data and more information. And so everybody went back and said, what data is specifically stated available to the public and what is not. The Secretary of State's office, a previous administration, made the decision not to allow, for the first time in I think 7 election cycles, that unique identifying voter number to the public, as well as to not allow from their office, but a county clerk could give candidates or other interested parties the information on whether or not a person has requested an absentee and whether or not they've turned that back in. So those are the two kind of issues at play that kind of abruptly stopped in this last election cycle. Various people, some of which in the room, had some concerns with that. And so we wanted to clarify the election code. First, by doing so, they weren't in the definition of registry list. So you'll see we've included both that unique identifying number and the absentee ballot request as part of the registry list of information on voters. Then you'll see we've done kind of 2 separate things. One is that unique identifying number there in 22-113 is part of the public information that you can give out when you request a list of voters. So those companies or those candidates, if you've moved in your district or moved out of your district, they can generally track you where you've gone. If it's within Wyoming, if you come back to the state, they try to make sure you line up with that number. More than one John Smith, for example. That being said, we also then included in 22-3108 the information related to absentee ballot requests, that should be public information. In our interim committee, we decided it's no different than seeing you in a line for an election and knowing that you've come in, got a ballot, everybody in the public can see you, and they know when you walk out, they assume you've voted. And so that information is probably public and relevant to giving to candidates. As many of you know, it's really good to know who's requested an absentee ballot and go visit them right away, because you know that they'll be voting sooner than others. So that's really what the committee did with this bill on what should be public. Obviously, House Bill 6 is going the other way on some of that information. But that's the background, Mr. Chairman. And I know Ms. Simmons and our county clerks have both been intimately involved over the past year. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Committee, you have questions for Chairman Zwanitzer? I appreciate the, oh, yes, Representative Newsom.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Representative Schwanitzer, is this just more of a codification of what's already happening? Or is this something different?
Chairman Zwanitzer?
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Newsom, yes and no. It had been generally historic practice since 2004 to allow candidates and private companies your voter ID number and whether or not.
Was that was 2004 the year it was created, the unique ID?
The county clerks may correct me, HAVA, I sat on that task force in 2002, and I believe either 02 or 04
We're getting a head nod.
was the first time we started identifying those. So these numbers were just kind of included until we realized there was no statutory authority to do so, at which point the Secretary of State's office previously then said, we're not giving out this information anymore. There was a backlash among the constituency, and so we said we will allow this information to go out and put it in statute. So it's clearly defined that this information is available.
And to follow up on that question, I want to make sure I heard you correctly, that I'm familiar with when the absentee cutoff because I have been a candidate, so I could use it up until last year is when I saw the cutoff at least. But I thought that you said 7 years ago, they stopped issuing the unique ID as part of the registry list. Is that what you said? Or when did they stop including the unique identifier number as part of the registry list?
Mr. Chairman, I believe the decision was made about 1.5 years ago when they realized there was no statutory authority to send out that number.
Oh, it came at
and
the same time the absentee was cut off?
I believe it was May 1st of 2022 because I requested the list of voters and I got those numbers before that May 1st, but I believe everything after filing in the 2022 election, all the information you requested did not include that voter ID number at that point on, from last May. And then certainly there were conversations with various groups behind me of why that was. And it was a AG and we had an attorney in the Secretary of State's office who was doing policy who agreed there was no statutory authority for that.
What was the 3 years that you talked about?
I don't remember, Mr. Chairman, if I may have misspoke
I
or.
thought you said 3 years ago they discovered there was nothing in the statute.
That is correct. So
Okay.
from what the interim understanding was, they noticed, they went through their statutes, realized this wasn't explicit, talked to the Attorney General over the, I don't know if it was 3 to 6 months, waiting for kind of internal conversation. And then I think they did provide notice to the Senate co-chairs, Senate and House co-chairs of the committee last January, February, that they were thinking of this step. And then the official step happened around May.
Gotcha.
I believe it was a year and a half that they investigated after the 2018 election, but really right after 2020, when people started kind of demanding some of this information is when they took a hard look at all of their statutes, because people were requesting anything they could get, quite honestly. And then the conversation was what is in realm and what isn't, and what should be allowed and what isn't, and what authority do they have to do that. The former administration could testify they had booklets of just freedom of information act requests from everywhere, both in state and out of state, on all of our election information, voter databases, you name it. High public scrutiny for the first time really in I think 20 years on our elections office and our county clerks.
Now, who assigns the unique ID number?
It's my understanding that when they register to vote,
The
the county
first time.
clerk's office in the HAVA system assign someone.
And you said I keep that ID number for the rest of my life.
It is my understanding, Mr. Chairman, that if you leave Wyoming and you come back, they try to match you, because our internal systems have access to your date of birth and other metrics that they try to tie you back to, yes.
And so I understand the desire to have access to the absentee info. The desire to have access to the ID number is because of all the other things that travel with it, all the other information about me, whether I own a home or firearms.
Mr. Chairman, so that number specifically doesn't, but as you'll hear, having that number and being able, you can track back which elections you voted at which addresses, and which ballots you requested, if you voted in every primary or only in general, if you didn't vote for an election cycle, they can track you back and then track you to those residences and which cars you purchased, and it's a very vast database of information on individuals in the campaign world.
Got it. Committee, other questions for Chairman Zwanitzer?
Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, Vice Chairman Knapp.
Chairman Zwanzer, so this helps in two ways. One, do they use this to purge any voter lists at all? When somebody does move out of a state, to track that ID number and purge those lists?
Mr. Chairman, the county clerks are here as well, but it's my understanding if you don't vote within an election cycle, you are purged from the voter rolls. But that number is not reassigned. It's
Okay.
just held, and then if you come back into the state, they will see if they can match it back to you.
Thank you.
All right. Additional questions for Chairman Zwanitzer? All right, thank you, Chairman Zwanitzer. Secretary of State's office. Come on up. Come on up, Deputy Nyman. You never know when your boss is gonna need you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be on this side, and Welcome to the new Corporations Committee. Welcome to Representative Chadwick and Representative Wiley. I'm not sure if it's your first committee meeting, but it might be. I'll never forget my first one there in Minerals, and welcome to the committee. This bill, we are supportive of this bill. Want to clarify that we are conducting an internal review. We began an internal review a week and a half ago on
Mr.
this.
Secretary, did you introduce yourself for the record?
Yes.
Did you? Did I just miss that?
Yes, I'm not used
Oh.
to this. On the other side. I'm
Okay.
a Secretary of State Chuck Ray.
Thank
We
you.
have here our General Counsel, Chief Policy Director Joe Rubino to my left, and then to my right, Chief Deputy Jesse Naaman.
Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you. These clarifications are really good in terms of ensuring transparency within the electoral process. The practice of the Wyoming Secretary of State's office was for, again, 7 cycles to release voter identification numbers, as well as information relating to absentee ballot requests and returns. That changed here, as Representative Zwanitzer mentioned, and when we entered office, we began an internal review 10 days ago. We have completed a portion of that internal review related to the voter ID numbers. And a couple things from the previous testimony. The AG's office has been very clear that they never waded into this issue. Now, the next bill is a little bit of a different issue, but they never waded into this issue. This was done within the Secretary of State's office, I think largely in tune with the testimony that this committee received in August by Ms. Monique Meese, who was the policy director at the time. They never did do the reclassification to make her the official general counsel. It was something I know that Secretary of State Buchanan intended in doing, and we completed that in merging those positions and having a general counsel within the office. We conducted that internal review on voter ID numbers, and we're communicating with the AG's office on that issue. And we came to the conclusion that the original policy of the office, the one that had been done for 7 cycles, was in line with statute. And there are a couple things that I think are very important that haven't been mentioned yet in the testimony here. One is House Bill 76 from the 2009 general session, which specifically removed voter identification numbers from the list of excluded data that was not a public record. And it was removed from the list of what would be excluded within 22-113. And we do have that bill, which was Enrolled Act number 54 from 2009. And I think the intent of and certainly when General Counsel Rubino wrote his opinion on this, I think the intent of the legislature is pretty clear here, that removing that from the list of exclusions was that it would not be excluded. And so we've completed that and changed our policy. The absentee data, we are beginning that process. I can tell you that in terms of personal, the second reason why we also changed on voter ID number, the policy of the office, was because of what is personally identifiable information. And this number, and in our opinion, is not necessarily personally identifiable. And I certainly think on sort of the spectrum, our initial feeling is that the dates with which one is requesting and submitting their absentee and with which they're processed is even less personally identifiable, especially because over 25% of our population is now voting absentee or early. But we have not yet completed that review. We always like the clarification from the legislature, though. So clearly putting it in the list of data that is to be released, rather than just removing it from the list of data not to be released, which is what was done in 2009, is certainly something that we support. I want to note too, there was a lot of emphasis in the last testimony about data collection and all this, and for what is it used for. But in terms of election integrity, having this data is very important because, one, it ensures that there aren't duplicate registrations. And one of the ways that a lot of people that are very interested in election integrity do that is by making sure there aren't duplicate numbers for the same voter. And also in terms of double voting, having that data on the absentee side, I think, is very important as well. So I want to make sure we emphasize that side of it. There's always a balance in policy making, but I think in terms of election integrity, That's very important. I think this bill advances that transparency. Thank you.
Secretary Gray, walk me through how what does that look like? How does that work when you have, that you can use the unique identifier number to ensure that if you have a John Smith, I'm assuming, registered 00001, and then you have another John Smith who registers and gets a new number, how does the unique identifying number help you to ensure that that's not a duplicate?
What it does is if, the same name or the same person has two numbers, if you don't have the numbers, there's no way to evaluate that, is my understanding. And there are folks that do that, that comb through the entire country.
Mhm. Okay. Sorry, Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Secretary of State Gray, just to clarify, so you're saying there are folks that are checking to see if people commit voter fraud essentially, and the only way to ensure that they know that they're not actually just finding two different people with the same name is with that unique voter ID number.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Yen. It's one method. It's not the only exclusive method, but it's a piece of what I think they look at.
Secretary Gray, you specified that you have reversed the policy of the previous administration's interpretation of whether the data is absentee data and register ID numbers are discoverable as part of the registry list. Have you issued a formal letter or anything on that? Or is this just the first time? Is this the first time you're making that declaration? I'm just curious because I remember a formal letter doing the opposite.
Mr. Chairman, want to be clear first on what we've reversed formally. It's the voter ID number policy. That has been reversed. We're still conducting the review on absentee status, and General Counsel Rubino wrote an opinion on this on the first item, and we made that decision and move forward.
Committee questions for the Secretary's office?
Mr. Chairman, one more thing.
Yeah.
I just want to be clear, we like the clarification as well. So
Right.
we're very supportive of the bill. Thank you.
Right, yep, I understood that. Yep, no, mostly I was just trying to see if I could get something in writing from your office that said that, that's all. I came real close to getting it out of General Counsel Rubino. Yeah, yep. All right. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. How about our county clerks?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and representatives. My name is Mary Lankford, and I have the honor of representing the county clerks of the state of Wyoming. Since there are few new faces here, and I've not had the pleasure of meeting all of you, I am the retired Sublette County Clerk. I served Sublette County in that position for 8 terms, 32 years. In 2018, I chose to retire, and in 2019, I began a consulting business with my client, the County Clerks Association. This is my 4th legislative session representing the state's county clerks, and as I said, it's an honor for me to be here. Our purpose today is to focus on the administration of Wyoming elections. Wyoming elections have integrity and are well run due to the dedication of 23 county clerks, their staff, with hundreds of committed volunteers and the support of the Secretary of State and local elected officials. The clerks appreciate the opportunity to review drafts and provide input into the development of legislation. This legislation was proposed due to requests for absentee ballot information and confusion over what was confidential and what was public information. The purpose of House Bill 5 is purely a question of policy. Is the electoral system healthier with the voter ID number and the absentee status public or private? The clerks can administer this bill either way. This bill can clarify what is and what is not public record. Countless public record requests were received in 2020 and 2022 by county clerks as well as the Secretary of State for more in-depth information. The need for clarification became apparent so that it could be determined what information could be released. An anecdotal observation is that some clerks have experienced voters complaining that the absentee ballot status was available for the public. Their concerns were that they did not want the candidates reaching out to them the day after they received their ballot. We have one suggested amendment to this bill for you to consider, and it appears in 3 different places in the bill. I'm going to refer to page 1, and it will be on line 3, where it says the absentee ballot requests and returns. We would like to suggest that requests and returns be replaced with status. So it would say the absentee ballot status. That way, we can provide the information of when it was requested, when it was sent out, where it is in the process, if it's been received, if it hasn't been received, would be more information available to the voters that are checking on their absentee ballots, whether they've come back or not, that type of information.
With that amendment, then I'm guessing what you're really suggesting is that on page 3, line 20, you would want to adjust the language requests and returns there, and then on page 2, line 8.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. So I've got those designations. So page 1, line 3, page 2, line 8, and page 3, line 20.
And I'm sorry, I'm a little slow here.
That's okay.
You're replacing requests and returns with absentee ballot.
Requests and returns with just status.
Okay, go ahead, please proceed.
In closing, this is a policy question that can be administered by the clerks either way. It'll provide clarification and guidance, and they just want it to be clear what is and what is not available for public consumption. I would like to respond, if I may, Mr. Chairman, to a couple of the questions that came from the previous testimony.
Yes, please proceed.
Unique numbers were created out of what was referred to as HAVA, the Help America Vote Act, in 2004. Those unique numbers are assigned by our voter registration system, which is called WILREG, and you'll hear about WILREG. That information is when a person comes in and registers to vote, their information is put into that database. It is coordinated with several other databases, being vital statistics to make sure that person isn't dead. Also to the Department of Justice to make sure that they're not aliens, that they're truly residents of the United States. It goes through some various scans to make sure that those folks are able to be registered to vote, goes through YDOT. So that happens. WILREG assigns those numbers. It isn't assigned by a person. WILREG assigns those numbers, and those numbers live forever. So if you register to vote in Laramie County and then you move to Carbon County, that number goes with you, your voter registration, your voting history, everything goes with you. If you happen to move out of state for a while and you come back to the state, your number becomes alive again, and you are alive in the voter system as long as you vote. And I think there was also a question about purging. Right now, county clerks in the state of Wyoming are working on their voter registration lists. They will through February, I believe, is when the deadline for that is. But they're looking for folks that did not vote in the general election. There are notices that are sent out to the voters to say, you didn't vote in the general election, do you want to remain on the list? If there's no response, they're automatically taken off because it's assumed that they don't live here anymore. Therefore, they're not eligible to vote. They can opt in a situation where they didn't show up to vote that day or whatever. They can remain current and fix that on their own, but they are given that notice and time to respond to that. So managing the voter system right now is going on in the county clerk's office in the counties, and they will put that through WILREG. WILREG completely is a statewide system, so the system talks to every other county and stuff, so you can tell if someone's moved Also, the information that comes from vital statistics, if people have passed away, that's also in-state and out-of-state deaths. So it's a really robust, big system, but it manages the voter registration system in the state and is the backbone of elections and voter registration and that information. So that number having some power, yes, that voter ID number does have some power. And I think that's clear here in that concern. And I believe that's all that I had that I made notes of from the other testimony. And thank you for the opportunity to be here and to address you. And I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you. I do have a question on the voter identification number. Because of the amendment you're proposing to the absentee ballot status, it makes me wonder the same thing. I mean, if one of the main purposes of me discovering that information might be to see the last time that a voter voted in which election, but so I could know the status without knowing their ID number. What is the idea of the general public having access to the ID number? Is that more of the example you gave with registering from county to county,
Right.
that I can check for? This is more of a check on fraud versus something
Yes,
that
Mr.
aids in a
Chairman.
campaign, as an example.
Yeah, yes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Langford, thank you for your service.
Thank
All
you.
those years, awesome. Thank you for fighting for fair elections around the state for so long. One question I do have on that ID number, are you concerned that that is being used to basically delve into someone's life and history and use that information in any disparaging ways? Do you feel like that is something that we're concerned about and has happened, or is this just a potential?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I haven't seen any evidence of that really happening. Maybe somewhere else out in the world, but in Wyoming, I don't believe so. They are unique identifiers, and I think the power in that you see is that it lives forever. That does maintain your voter registration and your history. It will show whether if you changed parties, if, those kinds of things. But as far as it, for other parts, I haven't seen that in Wyoming, maybe somewhere else.
Thank you.
Committee, additional questions for so you're representing the entire Association of Clerks.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions for the association? Which county were you from? I'm sorry.
Sublet.
Sublette? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Oh, I did have a question. You said that in the last two elections, clerk's office had received numerous public records requests for this information. How many were all 23 counties providing absentee data information, or do you know?
Mr. Chairman, I can't say for sure. I know the issue became that the Secretary of State's office, they were refusing to issue that
Right.
information, but I think there were clerks that were continuing to issue that information.
I know my clerk did.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There was some of that. I can't say that 7 did and the rest didn't, but yeah, I
So in
think
total,
that-
this bill doesn't change, and you said this in the beginning, that the clerks can administer this with or without the
Either
bill.
way.
Though there's no indication that the clerk's office would stop producing this information if we didn't advance this bill. This is primarily, as it is written, guided towards the Secretary of State's office.
Mr. Chairman, that's correct. And again, just asking for clarity and guidance
Sure.
so that we should be uniform.
Yep. Okay.
So.
Very good. No other questions? Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the room wishing to testify on House Bill 5? Gail? Come on up.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Nice to see new faces and all. My name is Gail Simmons. I am from Sheridan County, and I'm testifying as Civics 307. As such, partly because of interest and partly because of a background that I have in running databases, Since 2016, I have been pulling data, requesting data and reports from the Secretary of State's office, 3 different files. The first one being the registration, the second one being the voter history file, and the third now being the absentee. It was really the first 2. So I actually come to you as a user of this data, probably as extensive as anybody else in the state. So from a database perspective, without a unique identifier, databases become essentially burdensome, almost impossible. So for many years, I was able to provide information on, say, when questions came up about crossover voting. And because I had this data, I could actually track by linking together voter ID, I could actually track people that were changing registration, voting, and then changing back. And as a result of that, I was able to prove using the data that in fact crossover voting is not occurring, and that in fact the number of registered Republicans who do not vote in the primary exceed almost 10x the number of people who switch over. So there's a lot of information that this data tells us.
Hey, Gail, was that for Sheridan County or was
No,
that-
this is
That
statewide.
was statewide. Okay.
Statewide. So, so it really gives a lot of information about voting patterns. I don't really try to go down to the individual. I'm more trying to understand how this is working in the state. So it was a shock to find out that I couldn't get the voter ID starting with March. I also, as a part of this, have purchased data from an L2, which is one of these national companies that provide information. If they can get a state voter ID, they added in there, but primarily they're pulling information together that you actually have to kind of figure out yourself who that individual is. So the voter ID really is not set up to provide, through you, Chairman, Representative Haraldson, the kind of nastiness that we would not want to have occur. So I would like to ask, because I use this to encourage really work on participation. I know, for example, from their data that only 50% of eligible citizens are registered in this state. And I know that only 70% of the registered voters actually participate in the primaries. And so this is really critical when you have an initiative that is about voter participation. I would like to make a request that that in addition to having the voter ID, that you also add in registration date. What that helps us understand is this a new voter or is this a voter who's been around for quite some time? It doesn't really correlate to age, and birthday should never be on, but I would request that you add that into the list anytime it says voter ID, just after that. I also want to agree with the prior testimony that having it be status is much more usable. Right now, the request for the registration list, I think it's $125. That's because of a change in the way we asked for data. I think that is fine. I actually ask for that data twice a year, 3 times a year, 4 times a year on a voter in an election year. I use the Freedom of Information Act. In fact, I just sent one in to get the voter history file and the absentee. The voter history file really gives a feel for where we can concentrate on encouraging people who are not participating in every single election to reach out and give them information about why they should do that. So again, I run this database. I have data in my database going back to 2012 that so that I can see those patterns. And as I said, having been a database wonk for General Electric, using these databases to actually have facts instead of supposition has been really critical. And I stand for any questions.
Committee? Yeah, when I request the voter data file, I get the registration date in there, do I not?
The registration date is no longer being provided because it's not on the list. So what the previous administration did is they basically said any data field that is not on the list in Title 22, we don't provide. So the registration date is not on there either. So I would ask that go in there.
Yeah, I didn't realize that had fallen off as well. Okay. Thanks,
Excellent.
Gail.
Thank you.
Anyone else in the room wishing to testify on this bill? Mr. Winnie?
Mr. Chairman, Bill Winnie, Sublette County. I have a minor thought for you. Having voted absentee ballot for much of my 30-year career in active duty in the Navy, and Mary Langford, by the way, could probably have tracked my career through much of that as she got the various requests from places like Japan. But as we talk about the voter ID number and ballots and everything, I think there's a potential missing link that would be useful, which is barcodes. You ought to be able to track a ballot to a voter. And so the county clerks ought to know that they have X number of registered voters, Y number of them actually voted, and that the other ballots were never used, or take your pick. But the basic idea is in this modern world of barcodes, make it fairly easy for the county clerks to know who voted, who didn't, and that they're done with it. Subject to your questions, thank you.
Committee, questions for Mr. Winnie? All right, we appreciate your testimony as always. Additional testimony in the room? In the room. I know that I have some Zoom testimony, but everything I'm seeing is for 6. Do I have any hands? Okay, go ahead and admit her. If you're in the Zoom world and you're wishing to testify on this bill, raise your virtual hand now or forever hold your peace. She's in? All right, just need, what's her name? Laura, you just need to unmute and light up your camera. We can't see you until you light up your camera. We can hear you.
Can you see me now?
Welcome. Please identify
you.
yourself, and if you represent an association or organization, let us know, and then we'd love to hear from you.
I don't represent an organization necessarily. I live in Southwest Wyoming. Thank you for taking my comments today. I would ask for a vote of no on this bill. A yes vote to this bill will only further disenfranchise the American voter or your constituents. How are our elections supposed to remain open and transparent if ballots, ballot images, records, and data are not made available?
Hey, Laura, I think you're testifying on the next bill. This bill doesn't have anything to do with ballot images. That's House Bill 6. We're not on that bill yet.
Oh, I thought we were on House Bill 6.
Yeah,
So
sorry. Do you want to come back?
Yeah, when
Okay.
will that be occurring? I thought that was occurring at 12.
Maybe 5 minutes or so.
Okay, well, I'll just wait and listen.
Yep, just hang around in the Zoom world.
Thank you.
Thanks, Laura. Anyone in the Zoom world wishing to testify on House Bill 0005? Seeing none in the room and none in the virtual world, I will close public comment on this bill. Committee, what is your pleasure? It's been moved by Representative Harshman and seconded by Representative Yin. Discussion on the bill? Well, we can do amendments.
Mr. Chairman,
All right, let's do amendments on the bill.
I would like to propose an amendment
Okay, Representative Newsom?
on page 1, line 3, to change requests and returns to status. Page 2, line 8, the same, and page 3, line 20, the same.
It's been moved by Representative Newsom and seconded by Representative Haroldson. Barb, assuming you track that in, okay?
Mr. Chairman,
Representative Yan?
maybe you can help me with the constitutionality of editing the title. So I don't know if we can quite edit that part, but I think amending the rest should still be okay.
Yeah, why don't we take the amendment as, and this was kind of what I was trying to discuss with the good clerk, was that the amendment is really on page 2 and page 8, Barb? Or 2 and 3, yeah. Whoa, I just added 5 pages to this bill. On pages 2 and 3, don't amend the title, and we'll just let LSO will come back to us and tell us if that needed to be in there when they double check it. Does that make sense, Barb? So no amendment on don't amend page 1 in the title. Is that okay, Representative Newsom? Representative Haroldson, you good with that? Discussion on this amendment? I think it's pretty straightforward. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed, same sign, or a different one if you prefer. Okay, that amendment carries. Other amendments on this bill, how about the registration date was proposed by Gail Simons? Is anyone interested in that amendment? Representative Yin?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make that amendment to add it on page 2, line 8, after status, add comma registration date.
Okay, it's been moved by Representative Yin.
Mr. Chairman, and also add it to the
3.
line 3 as a new subsection.
Yep, so the amendment is on page 2, on line 8, after the word status, comma, registration date, and page 3, bottom of the page, you would add a Romanet 10 that would say information relating to registration status. Is that right, Representative Yin?
I believe that's fine, Mr. Chairman,
Okay,
but I do need a second.
okay, we do need a second. Seconded by Representative Harshman. Discussion on this amendment? Okay, pretty straightforward as well. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that amendment also carries. Those are the amendments I'm aware of. Are there any other amendments to page 1 of this bill? Any other amendments to page 2 of this bill? Page 2? Any amendments to page 3 of this bill? Okay, question on the bill. Barb, will you please do a roll call vote on HB 005?
Representative Chadwick. Representative Haroldson. Representative Harshman. Vice Chairman Knapp. Representative Newsom. Representative Ottman. Representative Wiley.
I think it's Wiley. Barb.
Is it? Is
Yeah.
it Wiley?
Yep.
You confused me today. I'm
That's
sorry.
okay. We're kicking the dust off, so
Okay.
that's all right.
Representative Yin.
Aye.
Chairman Olson.
Aye.
It passes.
All right. Good job, committee. One bill down. Oh, is I talked to some of you briefly before committee, and I haven't talked to everyone, but I will let everyone know that, especially for the newbies and newer to my committee, we have about 14 corporation bills between the Senate and the House. That means there's 7 of us, which means if we each carry 1 House bill and 1 Senate bill, we can divide the workload pretty easily. So be looking at the bills that are coming through. If there's one that you particularly are interested in floor managing, let me know in advance. That way I don't just assign you a bill. This one's easy because it was unanimous. Is anyone interested in floor managing this bill? Pepper or Representative Ottman? Thank you. All right, we will, it was unanimous, so we'll be there to back you up. You know that I told, I didn't give Representative Wiley a choice. I gave him 6 already. But I told him that the 2 easiest bills came up front, so you were smart, Representative Ottman, to grab that one. All right, House Bill 006, specified election records not subject to disclosure. What I know about this bill is that it provides clarifying language that certain election records are not subject to disclosure under the Wyoming Public Records Act. If you look at page 2, lines 5 through 8 gives you the list of what those certain election records are that are not discoverable by a public records request. That would be cast ballots, cast ballot images, cast vote records of individual voters, and other data derived from cast ballots of individual voters. So, as your chairman, I can read the bill and understand that much. As far as the background behind this bill and all of the discussion on it, I am clueless. Representative Chairman Zwanitzer, if you would like to, you can. You don't have to. We can just jump straight into public comment, but this one might be helpful for us to have some background information on.
Thank you, Chairman Olson and committee. Similar to the last bill, same section, except we're going the other way, that this is not disclosed information, right? So you can see already in the bill, we don't disclose social security numbers, birth dates, any of that information to the public. We had an issue. I guess we continue to have issues. When it comes to cast ballots, there are people in Wyoming who feel strongly that we may have had fraud in our previous election, especially perhaps a presidential election where one candidate didn't get the number of votes that they expected. Over the past 2 years, we've had, as you heard, numerous public information requests for just about everything. That includes people wanting to actually look at the actual ballots. And so all of our ballots that when we vote are actually saved by the county clerk for 2 years. They have in statute other places. All the ballots are put in a safe, kept for 2 years in case of irregularities, disparities, any number of things, and then they're disposed of basically 2 years after the election. But within that time, we had a large number of people asking for those ballots to be able to look at them specifically. When we have electronic voting machines, the voting machine itself takes an image, a photocopy, if you will, of that ballot. And so people said, well, we don't want to actually get the ballots, just give us the photocopy records from the machines of what those ballots were so we can double check to make sure nothing funny is going on. And so you saw this provision. This is another thing that I believe our Attorney General weighed in on, and they relied, it's Article 6, Section 11 of our Constitution. I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read the last sentence. All voters shall be guaranteed absolute privacy in the preparation of their ballots, and the secrecy of the ballot shall be made compulsory. And so our Attorney General and our Secretary of State's office previously said that means that you don't have a Freedom of Information request to be able to either see those ballots or see the ballot image. And there's been a lot of disagreement among several members of the public that they believe they are entitled to that and it doesn't violate the Constitution. That's the question before you. It was a divided interim committee. I will say in support of this, I'll just give you my personal thoughts. When I've voted absentee, or actually when I voted in election day, there were several people I did not vote for of offices. There may have been even some negative comments I wrote in about some people on the ballot, right? And I wrote in, it's my ballot. I don't expect anyone to ever see it. The thought of having a cast ballot record in my precinct, of which there are about 90 voters total, I would say if that cast ballot record was public, people could probably figure out which of those 90 ballots belong to me.
Because you wrote Representative Zwanitzer in for everything.
I did, Mr. Chairman, at least for a couple of those.
See, now everyone knows how your
Now
ballot
everybody
looked
wants to
anyway.
know how I vote. And so that's where some of the concern came, that if you're going to go cast a ballot, perhaps a notifier could at least be made to the public if you do support cast ballot records being public, that people are at least warned that they may be tied, right? We have some small precincts in Wyoming. There are some possibilities if you write in yourself, write in for precinct committeemen, let's say, people would maybe even suppose that to be your ballot. And I think that's where the concern comes from. So historically, again, cast ballot images were not considered previously. Our Attorney General weighed in and said that's basically a ballot. Those are not public records requests. This is a statute to solidify that in statute, that this is not discoverable information that should be allowed to the general public upon request. And so that's the background of the bill. I think it was a 9-4 vote in the interim committee coming to you. And I know there are disagreements out in the public on whether this information should be public or not. Enjoy that decision. But happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Just a question on what the ballot is that we're talking about, Chairman Zwanitzer. So when I cast my electronic vote, it prints out a ballot for me, and I can check that. I can check it on the screen, I can check it physically, and then I go and take that. Is that the ballot, the one that's in my hand that I go and put in the machine? Is that what an image is of?
So yes, Mr. Chairman, first let me say every county is doing it differently. Here in Laramie
Okay.
County, this was a year where electronic voting, you'd vote, you'd see it on the screen, it would actually give you that ballot to walk over to put in the ballot counter machine. That machine takes a photographic image of your ballot.
The second machine?
In here in Laramie
I
County,
got you.
yes.
Okay.
And other county clerks do it differently based on their equipment. I'm sure Ms. Langford will talk about.
The other question I have has to do with absentee ballots. So when I turn in an absentee ballot, I believe, I've never voted absentee, but if I am picturing the ballot correctly, you actually sign your name. I'm on that, when you request the ballot, when you request the absentee ballot, you sign your name. So that's different. If we had an image of that, we would only have an image of the request, not the ballot itself.
Correct, and when you turn in that absentee, you sign the outside, but the ballot itself goes into a secure place that clerks could talk about until it is counted as well.
So my name's not on that one either.
Not
obviously.
on the actual ballot,
Okay.
unless, of course, if you've written yourself in for a position
For
several
everything.
times.
Which is also how I vote. We think alike in that, yeah. Okay. All right, questions for Chairman Zwanitzer? Yes, Representative Wiley, please.
Representative Zwanitzer, so other than you signing your own name or your handwriting on the ballot, there are no identifying marks or anything?
Mr. Chairman, so there's and Representative Wiley, and so you can request in some counties a hand ballot, but in electronic voting, no, there wouldn't be anything besides perhaps you specifically. Our Constitution guarantees you can always vote in other. You can always write in someone in the ballot. So besides you putting your own name or someone being able to discern what they know about you, there's nothing else on the actual ballot that would ever tie it back to you, unless you specifically typed in, my name is Representative Wiley and this is my ballot.
Thank you.
Representative Yin?
So, Mr. Chairman, maybe just for the committee's edification, in Teton County, we are handed paper ballots that we do fill out the ovals, and all the write-in sections are handwritten in if you write in somebody's name. And I know other counties do it that way as well, before they put it in the ballot counter machine. So there are handwriting samples if you put in write-in parts for those ballots.
Representative Ottman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Zwanitzer, if these are not allowed, then if there is a recount, how would they be recounted? Thank you.
So again, Mr. Chairman, Representative Ottman, all of these ballots from an election are kept for 2 full years. So if a recount is requested, the county clerks will still have those ballots on hand and run those through the machines. And there's a whole process. People are invited in to generally watch, can't touch, for that recount for up to 2 years. After that 2-year period, the ballots are destroyed. Does that answer your question?
No. Mr. Chairman?
Give me a second chance.
So what would this do then? I don't quite understand the importance, like what is the nemesis behind doing this? Thank you.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative Ottman, there are many individuals throughout Wyoming who may believe that our election systems aren't at their full integrity, right? That there may be fraud in our election systems, that these machines can't be trusted, any number of things where people would like to inspect the actual ballots or the photograph of those ballots to ensure that the number the clerk reported or the machine reported is accurate. And so for the past 2 years, the Secretary of State's office and the county clerks have fielded many requests for people who want to see the actual ballots. The interpretation has been people outside of a recount or a formal procedure or a district court judgment don't have access to actually look at those ballots. They're kept in a secure location and safe. And even with a Freedom of Information Act request, those are denied. We don't let the general public touch ballots or look at those ballots outside of the county clerk's processes. And so this solidifies it in statute, so there's no ambiguity. But you will hear members of the public say they would like it the other way, where they should have access to these ballot images as well.
Okay. Sounds like we will be hearing from the public on this, so thank you, Chairman Zwanzer. Go to our agencies first. Secretary of State's office, do you wish to? I'll usually go with my state agencies first. It's that hierarchical status of government.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Chuck Gray, the Wyoming Secretary of State. To my left is Joe Rubino, our Policy Director and General Counsel, and to my right is Jesse Naiman, our Chief Deputy. As Wyoming Secretary of State, I asked this committee to oppose House Bill 6. As written, House Bill 6 goes in the wrong direction. It would prohibit county clerks from releasing a cast ballot image or a cast vote record of individual voters and other data derived from cast ballots of individual voters. Voter confidence in elections is pivotal, and we reiterate that over and over again. We need to be on the cutting edge here, not just with the statement that our elections are flawless, but proving that they are flawless every step of the way. And if passed, HB 6 would effectively prohibit an examination of ballots in Wyoming in any circumstance. I am merely emphasizing the importance of transparency in the process, which will lead to greater trust in Wyoming's elections. Simply put, allowing the opportunity to examine the machine vote tallies in certain situations will enhance the public's faith that Wyoming's elections are conducted fairly and accurately. I want to make sure that we counter, I think, some of the misconceptions about this bill. Some of them have been, put out there by the media. One is that the failure of this bill would allow for individuals to touch ballots, and that is not accurate. The current statute, which is in place, and the current interpretation still remains in place. But this goes the other directions and makes clear that an image, a cast vote ballot image, which is produced by the machines, is prohibited from examination. That is not touching a ballot. That is looking at an image of the ballot versus how the machine counted the ballot, which is what the machines produce. And so it's very important we're clear on that. The other, I think, misconception that has been put out there on this bill is that this in some way would counter the very important principle of ballot secrecy. And it's very important we maintain that. Wyoming law already allows the government to release documents to the public after redacting sensitive information that is not allowed to be disclosed. I'm confident that ballots can likewise be redacted of any personally identifiable information before they are released to members of the public who would wish to examine a cast vote image or a ballot itself. I would also note that, I talked with Clerk Irvin about this. If you look at our statute right now, the way the recount provisions have been implemented, and Representative Zwanzer referred to this as well, it is simply running the ballots through the machine again. If this bill passes, there is basically no ability to review the ballots themselves, whether it's an image or the ballot itself, because the recount statutes have been interpreted to just allow for a running through of the ballots through the machine. And I think that is a really, really dangerous precedent. I think we still have time in this session to maybe look at what the procedures would be for reviewing a cast vote image or a ballot itself, or we could kick it to the interim. But I think this goes way too far in the other direction of basically precluding any possibility of examining a cast vote image. You know, these situations where you have a precinct with 10 to 15 votes. Well, first of all, that already is reflective in the totals. I mean, people can already look at those precincts where, maybe 6 to 8 votes are cast. But I also think that we could set into statute some mechanisms for redacting in situations due to low numbers in precincts or recognizable handwriting to address some of these concerns. But to be clear here, the failure of this bill does not suddenly allow all of this data to be released. We would have to do more work to move in this direction. But I think the direction in this bill is very negative for our state. And I think it's going to send the wrong message and lead to a decline in voter confidence and not allow for any examination of the ballots themselves in any situation. And you can think about some of the situations if, we've seen them in other states a few years ago in North Carolina where there is evidence of a problem in a certain way. And we don't want to preclude options for us to be able to examine those images. Thank you.
Secretary Gray, it seems like the crux of what your agony over this bill is in the cast ballot images themselves. The ballot, the cast ballot, the actual ballot itself, I think you said under existing law wouldn't be in the hands of the public anyway. Is that right?
Mr. Chairman, right now we have this AG decision and we have not begun an internal review on that, but the AG decision prevents any of those from being examined. There was a group up in Park County that wanted to conduct a hand audit, not just of the images, but a hand audit. And to be clear, they didn't want to walk off with the ballots. They wanted to do it in a room with cameras, with people there. And obviously there would be a cost associated with that. That's one situation. The other situation is somebody asking for the cast vote ballot images, which is an image of the ballot versus the report from the machine of how they counted it. So there are two different situations. The AG has weighed in on this. We have not yet opened up an internal review. My point is that this goes in entirely the different direction. And what I would propose is in the interim, we really look at this issue and look at the situations where this data, where it would be appropriate to release this data, rather than go in the direction of absolutely none at all.
Seems to me, Secretary Gray, that the passage of this bill actually wouldn't do anything because there is already, if there's an AG's opinion in place and I'm a county clerk's office, all I have to do is, I don't need this bill. I rely on the Attorney General's opinion that says it's not discoverable, right?
Mr. Chairman, I think it codifies the current practice, which it's an opinion. This would codify that opinion with real implications, I think. It's already led to a decline in voter confidence, I believe. Thank you.
Representative Yin?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I think my biggest worry overall is if we do allow voter ballot images is that someone can know how, there's some people that you'd be able to know how they voted specifically. And I think it is important, to follow that constitutional provision on privacy because otherwise you can intimidate people by knowing how they voted, right? If that voter, and this is stuff that happened, in Chicago in the 1800s where people intimidated people to vote a certain way and they could check because they didn't have privacy. And so I'm glad that we have that in our Constitution. So I guess that's my question to you, Mr. Secretary, is how, let's say we do have provisions for redacting the images. Okay, so Teton County had 10,000 ballots cast. We're not the biggest county. How long do you think should the county clerk staff have to hire extra people to be able to do that redaction work? How would you see that going about, I guess?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Representative Yin. I want to emphasize again the importance of secrecy in the ballot. And this bill, the passage of this, the failure to pass this bill does not in any way impinge on the secrecy of the ballot. Now, in terms of the implementation of a procedure to release a cast vote record or a cast vote record image request, which I think that this committee in the interim should really evaluate what that procedure would be. And this office, I can tell you, would really love to engage with you in that process. I believe we can do it in a way where the secrecy of the ballot is absolutely maintained. Being able to recognize somebody's handwriting, I think there's a judgment call there for the clerks to make. But you also have to look at the downside. I mean, what if there is real evidence of some manipulation of the ballots, and we have no procedure, zero, to have any hand or eyeball examination? The implications there are very real. And I believe that this bill passes, it codifies that there is no ability to have an eyeball examination. That with the way the recount statutes have been interpreted, that the only way to have another examination of the ballots is to run them through the machines again. And that's a problem.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Representative Yin, please.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. When the county canvassing board, Mr. Secretary, meets, if they think that they do need to examine it, you're saying the county canvassing board has no method to be able to ensure the ballot is authentic, the ballots that have been cast are authentic?
Secretary Gray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Yin. The canvassing board may, but I think it would be subject to challenge, because if you look at the recount statute, the way it's been interpreted, it has not been traditional that it has been done with an eyeball check. It's been running the ballots through the machines again. And I think the canvassing board could have a motion and then do a hand examination. I think they would be subject to a lawsuit, and I think Wyoming statute, unfortunately, if this bill passed, might support that. Them not being able to do that. Certainly, I think the canvassing board could make any motion that they wanted to, subject to challenge. And the question is where the courts would fall on that.
Representative Newsom.
So I'm a little confused. And in the bill, page 2, line 1, says that we're talking about the Wyoming Public Records Act. And we're not particularly talking about the way ballots are handled by the county clerk's office.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Newsom, what I'm doing is an analysis how this would interact with other pieces of statute. And I called Clerk Irvin this morning to confirm what my understanding, and I know in your race we had a recount and was following that closely. It was running the ballots through the machines again, wanted to confirm that with Clerk Irvin. And you read the statute, it actually does not specify how that recount is to be done. At least I didn't read that there. So I wanted to confirm that with Clerk Irvin. And that's my concern, is how this interacts with the recount statutes, what the implications are in the long run. I mean, certainly the canvassing board that meets could make a motion, but I think it would be possibly legally challenged under statute with merit.
Representative Newsom.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems as though we're talking about two different things: the behavior of our county clerks and the security of our elections, and the Public Records Act, which allows me, I have in my district, I have a precinct with under 10 people. I believe that I could, if anybody wrote anything on there, that I could ascertain who voted how. And not just if it was a write-in vote, if it was a different sort of vote. So I believe that I know those 7 people personally. And I believe if I were able to see the images of those ballots, that I could ascertain who voted how. And how would you combat that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Newsom. So on the first question, I believe it's really important when we examine statutory changes to also consider how it interacts with other parts of the green books. And even though that interaction isn't the bill itself because of the traditions of how the state legislature writes up bills, mainly for clarity's sake, so it doesn't go hundreds of pages, we have to think about how these changes interact with other statutes. And so on your first point, what I'm saying is that when you have a system where the recounts have typically been a machine recount, and on top of that, you're saying the Public Records Act that there can be no examination, not only of ballots themselves, but images of the ballots, which are produced by the machine for the very purpose of examining whether the machine is conducting the count accurately, that the implication there is very troubling from a voter confidence perspective, that you really couldn't have an eyeball examination of the ballots, whether it's an image or the ballots themselves. On your second point, again, we have not initiated any review of the AG's decision, and my feeling would be that this bill fails. That is still in place, and I think that this committee in the interim should look at what the procedure would be for the release of these records and include in that examination what the redaction procedure would be in many situations. And one of those situations would be in precincts with low numbers of voters. And you could just do a blanket redaction. Just say in a precinct with under 15 people, you're just going to redact it. I mean, that's one approach for us to go in the interim. But this bill goes entirely in the other direction and says that there is to be no eyeball examination of these ballots in that situation.
Representative Newsom, follow up?
I think I will wait for the county clerks.
Committee, additional questions? I think another possible in between is, one thing that bothers me with the way that this bill is drafted is it doesn't even allow for a court order to change what is prescriptive in here. I think that if this bill at least said, unless otherwise ordered by a court, I would feel a lot more comfortable about it as I look at it with my attorney hat on. I mean, any statute that completely prohibits information makes me uncomfortable. I'm comfortable with the prohibition as long as I have an exception to get in front of a judge and prove to a judge why I should have access to it. And in a lot of instances, some of the parameters we're talking about could be put forth in that motion to access the information. The court very well could say, yeah, I'm going to allow you to have access to it, individual John Smith, but it's going to be, in camera review or something in order to protect the sanctity of that information. It's going to be redacted, some of the things that you're talking about, Secretary Gray. So I wonder if an in-between the positions with this bill, at least allowing a court order or putting in language that a court order could allow access to the information. What are your thoughts on that?
Chairman Olson, I think there's a lot of good thoughts there in terms of what that would look like. My request would be to kick it in the interim. I think this is an extensive conversation and I want to get it right. And I think we need to get a lot of input on this. Look at what the practice has been in other jurisdictions. So that would be my request to kick it there. In the interim, we're under we've got the AG opinion. Our office has not initiated any review of that opinion. And I think that's the better way to go. And I'd love to collaborate with you on that.
Additional questions for the Secretary? Thank you, Secretary. Clerks, come on up. Welcome back.
Mr. Chairman, I'm Mary Langford, and I represent the County Clerks Association here. As you probably can tell, the county clerks support this piece of legislation. Again, it's clarity and guidance in relation to the inordinate number of public records requests that we've received. This did come out of during the interim this summer. It wasn't a specific interim study, but it was studied by joint corporations. So that's where this bill did come from. I think that the point that there's a couple of things that I want to respond to, but I also want a couple points I want to make out or bring out to you. One being, would the election system health be improved or damaged if a single voter's ballot could be identified? And that's what we're talking about here. What does that do to the integrity of the system if we can identify what a single voter has voted? Is their ballot secret? The Constitution guarantees us a secret ballot. And then going back to the Constitution, in the last line of Article 6, Section 11 of the Wyoming Constitution, it says, all voters shall be guaranteed absolute privacy in the preparation of their ballot, and the secrecy of the ballot shall be made compulsory. The major question here is the ballot secret even after it's being cast? The Attorney General's opinion that was produced for Park County says the Constitution protects the ballot into perpetuity. So that's forever. Can ballots be identified? Absolutely. Either by recognition of handwriting, where voter chooses to write in a candidate, or if there are splits for small precincts, and you've heard those discussions already before. Splits specifically in a primary could isolate a handful of voters. Of those, one may be a Democrat, and the way they voted could become obvious. Or if the handful of voters voted for the same candidate, you would know how they all voted. The main emphasis of this proposed legislation is to provide the voter protection and preserve their right to cast a secret ballot in perpetuity. In addition, it provides additional clarification for election records not subject to disclosure. I'd like to respond to a couple of comments that were made. There's a lot of talk about recounts. And recounts are exactly that. You replicate the election day. So the ballots are run through the machine again, and with your goal of having the same results again that you got on election day. The other part of this discussion, when you start talking about ballots and cast ballot images and those types of things, you're testing whether the equipment has recorded what was cast on the ballot. You're checking the equipment for that. And there is a procedure in place for that. It was put into effect in 2021 as a pilot program and was run through the 22 elections. It's called the post-election audit. There was a program that was collaborated with University of Wyoming to pull a statistical data amount, and every county ran those. They looked at the images as well as looking at the ballot and compared those. So you are looking at handwriting. You're not looking at something that's been generated. And Mr. Chairman, I know in Laramie County, you folks use a touchscreen type of voting equipment. That's not the case in a lot of other counties. In other counties, you fill in the oval and you handwrite in your write-in. In the touchscreen.
So that was going to be one of my questions. How many counties do write-in ballots?
So to go back to the election equipment,
Or
Mr.
pencil
Chairman.
and paper ballots,
Right.
I'm sorry.
So the paper ballot with the ovals on it is used in all 23 counties. However, we are also required, back to HAVA, the Help America Vote Act, we're required to have another type of equipment in place that is a touchscreen, and it's to accommodate the handicapped community, basically. And in Laramie County, your county, for the election equipment that you had prior to what the ES&S equipment that you have now was a touchscreen type of system. Unique to Laramie County, not what is used uniformly across the state. So you had the touchscreen systems. That was a choice of your clerk here to do that. In the other counties, we vote on a ballot that's got bubbles that we fill in, It goes into a tabulator. Your ballot here also goes into the tabulator. It generates a ballot, and then that slip goes into the tabulator, just like all the other ballots, and it's tabulated just like all the other ballots. The equipment is able to do that. So that's kind of the equipment 101 on how that works. But the images, if you recall, that machine takes an image of the ballot, and that's what's tabulated. In Laramie County, that's printed, so nobody can really tell what that is. But in Natrona County, that's going to be your handwriting. And I've been a notary for 40 years. I've notarized lots of signatures. Working in a county office, in a public office, you know a lot of people's signatures. It's not uncommon, and it's not a silly comment. You can identify those things. Again, are we jeopardizing that secret ballot by not making this information confidential? The other, let's see, I was going to see what else. That was basically it. The post-election audit, though, let me talk to you just a little bit about that. That was done during the last election cycle. It was after the election had been canvassed. They went back and checked to make sure that their equipment was working properly by comparing the image to the ballot. That was done confidentially. If you attended one of those, they were public, in a public forum. They were in a public meeting where this work was done. I know in Sublette County, I attended ours. They checked they had 3,000 ballots, and they checked 300 ballots. You know, it was a significant amount. There wasn't anyone in the state that failed the test. There weren't any images that came out different from ballots. So that's already in place to check if the equipment is working properly or not. So with that, I thank you for the opportunity to speak, and I also am happy to stand for any questions.
I guess I'm floored to learn that the other 22 counties use bubble, fill in the bubble. I didn't realize that. What does the vision look like for the future? Is there any discussion amongst the clerks? Is there a plan? Is there a rollout phase for election machines, or we don't know what it's going to look like next year? What's that look like?
So, Mr. Chairman, in 2020, the state of Wyoming purchased election equipment statewide. So all counties have the same election equipment. And as I said, we're required to have what is called an automark, or it's not an automark, it's called an express vote nowadays. The old stuff was automarked. See, that's telling my age. But the express vote, and it is a touchscreen type of equipment. It's available in every precinct in the state, but it's as an option to be able to deal with, as I said, special needs voters. You're able to touch the screen.
I get all that, but
Yeah,
is there
okay.
some discussion amongst county clerks where they're saying, in 5 years, we want every county to have elections on these electronic ballots? Is there any discussion at all about what the future of the ballot should look like versus the other?
Mr. Chairman, no. It's the standard ballot is the paper ballot with the ovals on it.
Fascinating.
And that's, what is really out there and works the best for us, most cost efficient and that type
Okay.
of thing in the state. When we bought the equipment when the state bought the equipment in 2020, with the longevity of thinking 10 years down the road, we had come, 15 years from 2005 when we were given money to buy that equipment before, so.
Representative Harshman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Madam Clerk, former clerk, 32 years. Really appreciate your
I was a
service.
child when I started,
Yeah.
sir.
Appreciate you and your expertise. And as I read the bill, though, really, we're talking about all these images, but the first part that is not subject to the Public Records Act is cast ballots.
Mhm.
Nobody's even said that. We're all talking about these images. I don't want anybody to look at my ballot. And I guess I don't understand, where what this controversy is really about. I mean, I think the Constitution is pretty clear. My ballot is secret. And so is there a time, Sue, you mentioned all the post-election audits and how those happen and on recounts, has there been any of your experience of 32 plus years in your last 4 years now and of where there's been, because I hear a lot, and I'm not really, but I hear about hand counting. That's somehow more accurate, or I think is that, so maybe touch on that a little bit.
Well, for starters, in the statute, we're told that if we generate a ballot that's to be used, let me read this to you, and I hate reading to people, but let me tell you this. So 22-14-114, ballots designed to be counted by machine, each individual vote shall be determined by the voting equipment and shall not be determined subjectively by human tabulation, except when the intent of the voter is unmistakable, but the ballot was received in such a damaged or soiled or other condition that it is rejected by the machine. So what that is a ballot has been damaged and it's reproduced. That's a function that county clerks have done to be able to make sure that those votes count. So those are damaged ballots, and that does happen, especially if sometimes if they're mailed and that type of thing. But our ballots are not intended to be hand counted. They're to be hand counted. They're to be counted by machinery and tabulated by that equipment. And that's the equipment we're talking about that takes the image of the ballot. But there is a ballot, and it's your ballot. And we're talking about the secrecy of that ballot. And
Committee? Additional questions, Representative Newsom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, like, machines being weird. I lost my train of thought a little bit. So I saw, or I have seen in the past, newspaper articles that say who wrote, or not who wrote in what, but if Mickey Mouse was written in or that sort of thing. So where does that information come from for the newspaper article to say Mickey Mouse got 27 votes, but Dan Zwanitzer only got 1?
so, so when Mr. Chairman, Representative Newsom, so when the ballots are tabulated and those images are made, the equipment is able to make a list of all of those names, whether they're spelled appropriately or not, or whatever it is, and it tabulates that for us so that they can see, if what that is. Now, reporting that, we've got some leniency on what we have to report and what we have to count, because it's ridiculous in a lot of cases, but we do have serious write-in campaigns. And so you have to be able to count those ballots and that type of thing. But the equipment makes that image and then makes that list of those names as best it can. So
One more follow-up, Mr. Chairman. Are there people that sign their absentee ballots although they're not supposed to?
Mr. Chairman, so an absentee ballot, when it goes out, of course, you sign a request form, and that's separate from your ballot and your envelopes. When it comes back, the back of the envelope needs to be signed. That's part of the requirement of submitting that absentee ballot. But as far as any signatures or anything on the ballot, there isn't anything required, and there shouldn't be anything put on there, because you've jeopardized your secret ballot when you sign any of that paperwork. So.
Representative Wiley?
Yes, Ms. Langford, thank you. Thank you for your service. I have a couple of questions. When you do the post-election audit, are there certified poll watchers there?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yes, there are. And a lot of times what the clerks have been doing, they do it in conjunction with their canvass. So the canvass is a representative of each of the parties as well as the clerk. But yeah, the public is invited and can be involved.
And then just one more follow-up. And then if we were to allow this and you could look at these ballots and somehow we redact the written handwriting, that would also affect how we can count said votes, correct?
Yes.
Thank you.
Vice Chairman Knapp?
And there's a difference here because I'm trying to stay on topic, but since the title specified election records not subject to disclosure, in your opinion as a clerk, because in Wyoming, we all say, well, this didn't happen in Wyoming and in large part to our clerks. But in other instances, would you say there's a charge for a clerk to not only make sure that ballots are secret, but to ensure a free and fair election?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, absolutely.
So may I have a follow-up? Yes. So if somebody had an issue with an election, say statistically it was way out of proportion, if attorneys or a person who files suit weren't allowed to see physical ballots, do you think that would impair any part of a free and fair election?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I'm sure it would put question on the integrity of the election if you weren't willing to put that, but you're compelled, I believe, if you're served with any kind of legal documents, those things can be compelled by the court.
Mr. Chairman, one more follow-up.
Yeah.
So I liked the idea of having an amendment on a exception for a court case. However, would you agree this may fall under an interim study that would encompass both a secret ballot and that free and fair election part, so that clerks could be uniform throughout the state and could have something to follow in case that were to happen?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, that's up to your group of folks. That's a policy question. We're concerned just about administration of the election and what can be confidential, what can be public, those kinds of things.
Mr. Chairman, just one more question. And I apologize for asking it in that way. Obviously, that's our policy question. However, representing the clerks, would you say that both sides are important to an election? Both the secret ballot and the free and fair part, if there were to be an audit?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, yeah.
Thank you.
Representative Ottman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for being here. What a job you guys have to do. What I'm thinking is that with the importance of this, with fair elections, but also with the secret ballot, it occurs to me that we have a report from the AG's office that says one thing, and then the Office of the Secretary of State that is wanting to check on other things. So there's two state offices that really are looking into this without a definitive answer, as well as the clerks wanting to keep the secrecy, but also in our nation, such questions on and importance of voter integrity. And I'm just thinking this is so very important, and I don't see that this bill is an answer. And so I was just wondering if possibly the meeting of these entities in an interim would be a good idea, because this is the basis of our country and our state. And if the interpretation by those people that are running it are different, I don't think it's clear enough to make a decision. Thank you.
Wouldn't you agree?
Yes, wouldn't you agree?
Or would you agree?
Mr. Chairman, I believe that we just need guidance and clarification.
All right. And committee, I am gonna I'll take one more question, but looking at the clock, we do have to gavel back in at 2:00 and we still have, public testimony to take on this. So I'll take this as the last question for the clerk. Yep.
Ms. Langford, how do you handle it now when this information is requested?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, I believe that they're handling those with public records requests.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Langford. Appreciate your testimony.
Thank you.
Is there public comment? So I'm going to go to public comment in the room and then I'll go to my virtual world. I have about a half a dozen people signed up in the virtual world. Whether they're still there or not, we'll find out. But I'm going to limit public comment to a minute per person. Is there public comment in the room on this bill? Gail? Your minute starts now. No, I'm just kidding.
Gail Simmons, Civics 307. Just a couple of things really quick. I'm not an attorney, so I don't understand why a public records request would prevent attorneys from being able to get. I would like to point out that the clerks are our chief elections officers, and the confidence that the decrease in confidence has been due in this state to unfounded and undocumented concerns. Our 23 county clerks are voted on. They are the ones who are the first law of defense for both our privacy and our election integrity. I think we owe it to them to give some backup on that. I can tell you that the number of precincts that in the state that have less than 100 people in it just registered is 37. When you take into consideration the number who actually cast a ballot, which is about 70% of that, you start really increasing. And when you split it by Democrat and Republican, it is absolutely possible to see who voted where, which should always trump, my privacy should always trump unfounded concerns about election integrity, given that our clerk's responsibility is to cover that. And then finally, defects per million opportunity is something that statistically is provided on errors. And I just want to point out that a machine is capable of 6 sigma. That's 3.4 defects per million opportunities. The max that a human being, and it's worse if it's a collection, the max of their is 66,807 defects per million opportunity. Machines are infinitely more reliable than human beings. And I stand for questions.
The last phrase is a little scary outside of the election context, but while probably accurate, it's scary to think that machines are far better and superior.
When they did a check this last time after the election, and they did a percentage, they had 0 errors between the first count and the check they did afterwards. 0.
Representative Ottman.
Mr. Chairman, just a quick question. Thank you for your testimony. I was just thinking during the redistricting process, I remember that was one of the major concerns of the county clerks, was to make sure that voters weren't identifiable. So what do you think about that?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Ottman, that is one thing down to when you're looking at the total numbers. So they're saying if there's only, 10 people and you've got 5 and 3, you could probably figure out who it is. That is a completely different matter than being able to see 8 images and see their handwriting and see who was left off and who was not. This is about the public not seeing this. Our county clerks, we owe them the confidence in their professionalism. So it's completely different because that concern had to do with the total numbers. And we have all the way down to 18 people in precincts. And we have 37 precincts that have less than 100. And that's everybody, not just, all affiliations.
All right, thank you. Additional public comment in the room? Ms. Herman?
Thank you, Chairman Committee. Marguerite Herman for the League of Women Voters, and I'll be very, very brief on this. One of our main legislative issues is access to the ballot and voter participation. The first things what we heard from the county clerks is there's plenty of confirmation that our machines work, and the audits turned out as Ms. Simmons said. What we also heard is the sanctity of a confidential ballot, and I would have to say that what this bill is asking us to do is to undermine that confidence in a confidential ballot to achieve something that we don't have any evidence exists. And I just say the trade-off is not worth it. The worst thing I think at this point for something that's unverified and uncorroborated is to erode the confidence in the sanctity of the ballot, the confidentiality of the ballot to keep people away from the polls. We don't want to discourage people voting. We want, when they say we have a vote, that it is secret, that it will be secret. So I think the trade-off to prevent something that we don't really have evidence exists is really not worth it. And I would, the League opposes this bill and would ask that you defeat the bill. We do, however, think that the clerks should be able to indicate what the who has voted and who has not. And I know that those kind of figures that are used by get out the vote people, but as it's actually they're viewing the actual ballot for all the reasons given, we think the trade-off to achieve something that's not verified is not worth it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herman. Additional public comment in the room? Online, we have 3, 4? One hand, perfect. Well, that'll be our last 2 hands. Those 2 hands will be our last 2 public comment. 4 hands. All right. Let them in, 1 minute each.
Did you call on somebody?
Yep, go ahead, Laura. Go ahead, Laura.
Okay, my name is
Just as a
Laura.
reminder for everybody, I have to limit you to 1 minute because we have to gavel back in 8 minutes and we still need to actually talk about this bill. So go ahead. If you're not actually, if you're not on my list already signed up, I'm not going to let you in, but Laura, you're the one exception. So go ahead.
Okay, my name is Laura Tolliver Pearson. I'm a sheep rancher in Southwest Wyoming. I would ask for a vote of no. A yes vote to this bill will only further disenfranchise the American voter or your constituents. How are our elections supposed to remain open and transparent if ballots, ballot images, records, and data are not made available to we the people? It is my understanding that there is no personally identifiable information on these documents anyway. The public should have the right to this information if the need arises to investigate. Withholding information from the public leads us to ask, what is being hidden? Election integrity and transparency is a must.
Perfect. Thank you. That was very succinct. Now, hopefully the rest can follow in your footsteps. We'll go to Mr. Lang. Go ahead.
Chairman Olson, committee members, thank you for the opportunity here. I had more minutes prepared, but I'm just going to cut down to 1. There's a point that has not been made yet. So I'm testifying today to advise this committee that if it's your intent to increase voter turnout, voter confidence, you could do no better than by voting this bill down and keeping these records responsive to public records requests. And I use the word keeping intentionally because First, the very existence of this bill demonstrates that there's currently no statutory authority to withhold these requests. And second, and I think even more obvious, is that the ballots themselves have been accessible to the public for most of the 130 years of Wyoming history. And so until the advent of mechanical voting machines, visually inspecting these ballots was the only way to count them. And especially with regard to write-ins, they're still that way. And yet, nevertheless, I've not been made aware of either voters or county officials who objected that this violated Wyoming Constitution with respect to the absolute secrecy in the preparation of the ballot until very, very, very recently. And maybe just one more thing to say about this Attorney General's opinion, which has come up a couple of times. In the first page of the 16 pages that are written, the Attorney General goes at pains to say, number one, that she is not advising the county clerks at all. They have their own attorneys to advise them. And secondly, with respect to the authority that she has over the Secretary of State's office, it's simply an advisory opinion and nothing more. Again, if we would pass this bill, it would be doing by fiat what the Attorney General is really unwilling to do. As somebody already pointed out, we've already got a difference of opinion. This needs a lot more work. I stand for questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Lang. I appreciate your testimony. Let's go to Mr. Moody.
All right. Thank you, Chairman, also members of the committee. I don't support this bill. I'll just quickly say here in Laramie County for our school board election, the East Triad was very close, decided by 20 votes. And if there was a recount, it would have been nice to see if there any discrepancy in the ballots or if there was mishandling of them, and that would have been available to the respective candidates. And I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Moody, for joining us. Since you're here in town, next time come on into the room and join us.
It's really bad outside, so safe travels, everyone.
Miss Aguilar, you're next. Did we lose her? Did we lose Cheryl?
Am I back on?
Yep, welcome, Cheryl. Go ahead, please.
Okay, sorry about that. Yeah, my name is Dr. Aguiar. I am from Hot Springs County. I'm a citizen and I urge you to vote no on HB 0006. There are, one of the perks of electronic voting machines is that they take instant images of the ballot cast. I mean, if that's a feature, why don't we use it? And I agree with Secretary of State Gray that this bill it looks like has just kind of slapped together, and it could be worked on quite a bit more and make a lot of different, like redactions and certain instances where we would not have to show the possibility of those 33 precincts. I'm not sure how many precincts are in this state, but I would imagine 33 is sort of a low percentage of precincts. And there has been cases where it is important to have a cast ballot image. In Fulton County in the state of Georgia in the 2020 general election, results were contested. And they recounted the paper ballots 3 times, and lo and behold, the same number came up all 3 times. And only with the cast ballot images were they able to find that there were 17,690 ballots missing. And of course, they weren't in the vote that was counted 3 times over and over and over again. So that was an important instance. In Arizona, in the 2020 general election, the wrong marking tool was used in a huge county. They used Sharpies. They bled through, and an immense amount of ballots had to be adjudicated. In other words, someone other than the voter chose their vote. And that, of course, the Secretary of State there would only allow the counting of the adjudicated ballots. In other words, the person who determined who the voter actually voted for when they may not have voted for him. So cast ballot vote images are a useful tool to show the voter that their true vote was cast in the way they wanted or not at all. It allows the citizen themselves to verify this themselves without costing the taxpayer a dime to, which would further increase distrust of the election process. I stand for questions or sit.
Yep, thank you, Cheryl. We appreciate your testimony and you zooming in all the way
Thanks.
from Hot Springs County. All right, committee, with that, I will close public comment. We only have a few minutes left. My clock says 3. First committee, I would ask if you have, what is your pleasure on this bill?
What do we want to, Mr. Chairman, do we want to just lay it over to our next meeting? We've just got a few minutes. I don't think we want to be late. What's our plan on the floor? Are they reading in bills?
I think we're just reading in bills.
Okay.
I don't think we'll have a cow yet.
Votes or-
I don't think so. I mean, committee, I think that do you have a lot of opinions, amendments? Think we can wrap this up in 5 minutes or?
Okay, I'd move the bill so we can work on it.
Okay, it's been moved by Representative Harshman. Seconded by Representative Yin. Real quick, I will throw out an amendment that I have from LSO. LSO in their review had an additional amendment that is to page 2, line 8, after the word voters, insert if the dissemination would result in the identification of an individual voter's vote. So it's clarification on why this list exists. And this is an amendment from LSO. Okay. I guess that's my motion and seconded by Representative Harshman.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Discussion on this amendment. Does everybody understand what it's doing? Okay, it just simply adds the sentence at the end of voters on line 8, if the dissemination would result in the identification of an individual voter's vote. Okay. All right. I think LSO's opinion is it helps the bill, I guess. All those in favor of the amendment signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? That,
No.
okay, that amendment carries. Any other amendments to this bill? Any other amendments to this bill? Amendments on page 1. Page 2, where the meat of the bill is. Discussion on this bill. Representative Haraldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think one of the things we need to understand is over the last 3 years, we've seen a very interesting situation come onto our hands, and that is a loss of faith in our voting system. Some of it probably based, some of it definitely not based. I believe the cry wolf syndrome is an issue we're dealing with, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. If someone doesn't trust it, they don't trust it. And so then I see that we have a bill like this coming forward. We have citizens testifying saying, hey, this doesn't work. We've got 2 of our top 5 offices basically that are going against each other, and we're 2:00. And I just don't know if this is our best option of throwing this onto the table and creating a policy that probably doesn't represent the actual populace that is going to be affected by said policy. So I believe it's been very clearly stated, this needs to be an interim topic, and I know it was, and I'm sorry we're reintroducing an interim topic, but I believe that the solution that we came up with is not a solution that truly is going to be answering the question. So I think at this point, I think we'd be foolhardy to just send something that, I'm going to use a term I heard as a freshman, maybe isn't ready for prime time, into prime time.
Representative Yin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So with the amendment, if the dissemination will result in the identification of an individual voter's vote, I think that makes it pretty simple. The courts, not the courts, the Public Record Act wouldn't allow you to release identifiable ballots. And I think that is absolutely consistent with the constitutional provision of secrecy of the ballot. The issue is if we don't passed the bill and for some reason a county clerk decides to release ballots for whatever reason, because they thought that it made sense, then it's out in the world. And once it's out in the world, if someone can identify it, then you've lost it because it's in the public, the information's in the public, and someone could possibly identify the 10 people in Representative Newsom's district and then release that to the world. And that, if anything, would undermine voter confidence. It's being able to not know that when you go to the ballot, that someone would be able to out every single vote that you made. And I think that would be a real tragedy. So I think that everyone should vote aye.
Thank you, Representative Yin. Any additional discussion? If not, it's probably a good time to vote. We only get one bite at this apple.
I think, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Harshman.
Well, I think the amendment helps the bill. I do think, though, just talking about the Wyoming Public Records Act. Can't look at my social security number, right? Can't get personal information about me, but you potentially then can look at my ballot. And you say, well, the ballot's anonymous, but if I wrote on it, maybe not. And I think that's the part that as we sit and wrestle with these issues, I think the amendment helped the bill. I think we're just the first, well, we're actually probably the second step in this process. It's gone through an interim process. I don't know. Part of me, I mean, I like moving stuff into the arena out on the floor, and then you've got 62 idea machines working on it. And if it doesn't pass muster, it doesn't pass. And then it goes through the exact same process at the other end of the hall. So I don't think, I mean, with this constitutional provision, as I have it pulled up in front of me and highlighted, I don't know. It's a balance here, and I just, nobody needs to look at my ballot. And as the longer I sit here, I feel more, in this phenomenon of public records requests for ballots is something new. That's a new phenomenon. It never happened before. And so we're gonna have to deal with it. So anyway, I'm gonna vote to move this on to the rest of the House to get everybody working on this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chairman Knapp.
Just one comment. I think moving this bill forward does nothing. If you were to have a case today, they would look at the Constitution and have that opinion. There's nothing on a ballot today that absolutely identifies the voter. And so the amendment does really nothing because it just talks about the identification of an individual voter's vote still. There's no absolute identification. I agree that the general public should not be allowed to see votes or see ballots. But in the case of a lawsuit or in case of and there's a difference between a recount and an audit, a definite difference. And so I think this bill does nothing to accomplish any of that. And as it sits right now, the Constitution stands.
Representative Wiley.
I think as we hear now, we're trying to thread this needle because we have to keep the sanctity of the people's privacy as important as this right to vote. And there's so many problems, and we can hear this up and down the board today. I think we should take it to interim so we can work on it more.
All right, committee, I'm sensing you're ready to vote. Barb, I'll go ahead and do a roll call vote on HB 0006.
Representative Chadwick?
Aye.
Representative Haroldson?
No.
Representative Harshman?
Aye.
Vice Chairman Knapp?
No.
Representative Newsom?
No.
Representative Ottman?
No.
Representative Wiley?
No.
Representative Yin?
Aye.
Chairman Olson?
No.
3 ayes, 6 no.
All right, thank you, committee. We are adjourned.